So welcome so much. It's so good to see all of our partners. You know, I sent out the Working Bridges employer update just yesterday, and there's a lot happening. I think everyone is so busy this fall. I'm pretty sure I forgot that September happened. I'm not sure where the month went. We're in October, and the team, you know, just an update from Working Bridges. We've had a lot of training opportunities, a lot of visibility out in the community, which is wonderful. But a few things I thought I'd share with everyone in the room. We have a mental health first aid session that's virtual on October 21st. I'm actually going to be at Rhino to host a room with some of the employees so they can have a viewing and sort of learn together. But if you're interested in that, I think there are maybe two or three seats left, very, very tight. So if you want to let me know, I can make sure you get to Kristen for registration. In October, so October 26th, there's a session that we're coordinating with VBSR, and it's a deep dive on employee mental health, something that I think is on many of our minds these days. We're seeing increasing mental health challenges with employees, and seeing that there are employees that are, you know, that we can support through resource coordination, but also really trying to get connected with, the team connected with United Way's mental health initiative. So this session will be a joint session between Working Bridges and United Way's mental health initiative. So I'll share the link to that in the chat as we go on. I won't do it right now, but that's in the update. And then in January, we didn't put a date out yet, but we'll be having our next open session for Working Bridges Concepts, which is a virtual training. So we'll make sure you get that date out for those of you that have that supervisor manager training that you'd like to share with your teams. That will be in January. And then the next Innovation Lab will be in January as well. So January, we'll start off with sort of in the next meetings anyway, but watch for dates. We don't have dates yet for that. So basically 2023. So let's get started. Today, we're here to talk about transportation in Vermont. And this is actually really great timing to have this conversation with partners, because for many of you know CATMA, which is our transportation design management partner. They are, I think that CATMA stands for Chitin. Well, there's an acronym. I'm not going to worry about what it stands for, but many of you know CATMA, and you might be part of the employer transportation network that they convene on a quarterly basis. So it's a meeting that happens quarterly, and it's really a cross sector of partners. It's transportation service providers, community partners, and employers or business can come to that table to talk about all kinds of transportation resources and new ways of supporting transportation needs across our community in Northwest Vermont. Thanks, Marlena. Oh, good, you're there. It's nice to see you. So Marlena's here from CATMA. And so in fact, Marlena, do you want to just say a quick word about the CATMA Summit coming up? Because I wanted to share that.
Sure, and thank you so much for mentioning us. Yes, so we're the Chittenden Area Transportation Management Association, which is kind of a mouthful. So we all say CATMA, and we're having our first transportation summit on October 18th. So we are talking, we have speakers, we have panels, there will be a lot of networking. It's at UVM Davis Center. And members of if you're in our ETC network, you get a discount. If you're a member, you get a discount. So this is the last week to sign up for a general admission ticket. And thank you so much for posting the link. I hope everyone will check us out. We really do have quite an incredible group of people showing up as well as presenting. So I think it's going to be quite an interesting moment for transportation, not only in Chittenden County, but also Vermont. Thank you, Connie.
Thanks, Marlene. I appreciate you sharing more details about that upcoming event, and Working Bridges will be there for a short midday lunch demo of Strain that focuses on transportation resources. So we'll be happy to be there, and we're hopeful we may see your faces there. I also put the link in for the training focused. It's a workshop focused on employee mental health and workplaces. So that's just to come, and we want to make sure you know about it. Please come or invite others that you think are interested, peers that you work with, people who are interested in figuring out new solutions and ways that we can support employee mental health. So transportation, mental health, lots of good updates. But our convening today is really about exploring transportation resources in Vermont, specifically with a spotlight on vanpooling and how it works, and how many of you have vanpooling as an option at your workplace. Can you use your little yellow hand that comes up? Raise your hand. Use a hand. I see that. Thank you, Shannon. So Shannon said Autumn Harp has it. That's great. So we'd love to hear it. So Shannon, Cindy, so UVM Medical Center, Autumn Harp are two partners right now who have vanpooling. So that's great. And I think perhaps Cindy and Shannon can be helpful resources for us as you might consider vanpooling as an option to support employees and their transportation needs. Really, this conversation came out of some work that Leah and our team did with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. We actually surveyed employees last year and learned that of employees that had transportation issues, it was clear that those transportation issues were significant issues that derailed them from their work. So it sort of sparked new thinking of how can we address this. In the past, Working Bridges has run a transportation pilot in partnership with Good News Garage and Ready to Go, and provided some short-term transportation rides or commute rides for employees to get them to and from work. We've had some successes around transportation, and now that we're, really, I think now is a time for us to revisit what are the existing resources, do they make sense in your work, what can we learn, how can we learn from each other for those of us who've done this before. And let's talk to our friends who do this work every day. So that's why we have Dan and Joe. Dan Courier's with Go Vermont, hi, which is the state of Vermont. And he's here to share more about the existing resources and sort of the landscape of what kind of transportation resources can Go Vermont support employees with. We can ask questions. And then Joe Traina's here from Enterprise, and he supports employers in our community to operate van pools and to help with everything from the mapping, which I thought that's really interesting to me, Joe, because that's a level of work that is beyond my brain. But the mapping and the plan and even the outreach, and has been able to describe vanpooling as not only transportation, but an instant community of support. When I last talked to Joe and he was in St. Albans, we had a meeting over at Travel Cup. I actually grabbed some of his time, and I was struck by not only this resource as an affordable strategy, if we can find ridership, and that if there's opportunity, we can take that opportunity and create an option for employees. But the way you described how a community forms around rides and around transportation, that felt really important to be able to share with the network, to think about how that's a strength for employees and a resource that goes beyond a ride. So I want to hand it over to Dan and Joe. And so maybe Dan, if you wanted to start us off and share more about Go Vermont, go for it. I'll let you introduce yourself too a little bit more. Go ahead.
Thanks, Connie. Can you hear me okay? Sometimes my headset doesn't like to transmit well. And so thank you. And I do have a few slides and so that I'm going to do a share of, just to help us have a conversation around Go Vermont. And so if you don't know us, we are a statewide resource for travel options across the state. We partner with Commute with Enterprise and Joe for we actually call it the commuter co-op, because it's more than just vans, right? It's other vehicles that we're putting on the road to help transport employees to their work sites. And so But Go Vermont, has a robust website that includes a lot of information, whether it's riding the bus, whether it's ride sharing, and that's like carpooling, whether it's train information or even ferry or EV charging. And this is just the tip of the iceberg for our resources. And so I put a small screenshot below our banner here so you can kind of see, we expand out, right? For ride sharing, we also talk about like the car share program that exists in Burlington. So anyone that, can participate in car share would be a good option. Carpooling, commuter co-op, park and ride locations, there's lots of resources. And so, anyone that goes to our website will also find right off once you pan below this banner is that we've got a lot of travel apps as well. And those are apps for your phones, right? Whether it's track your bus in real time or whether it's our trip planner. And that can actually help you actually manage a trip, right? So from point A to point B, like say you got to get from your work to your home, then reverse that trip. The trip planner that we have can actually help you navigate, what are the options? Is there a carpool close by? Is there a vanpool close by? Do we have any bus routes that are running between where I live and where I work? And so just more options to mention, and so our big mission, right, is to be a solution for you, right? We bring together the resources, we hire the vendors so that we can offer these solutions to the folks in Vermont, the employees, the employers, so that they can have, a reliable workforce, so people can arrive to work on time. And so there also is, it also helps to save costs, right? When we were increasing gas prices, we usually see a spike in transit ridership. Totally happened this time as well, but gas prices have been going down. But overall, it's a savings, right? And then it helps to, save the impact for the environment as well. And so, and we really are out to meet the employees and the employers where they are, whether it's stress around recruitment, and bringing people from maybe a new portion of Vermont to your work site. There's lots of great options. And Joe will go over some of the details he has for the commuter co-op in a second. And so, as I sort of mentioned, we are looking to provide the tools for you so that you don't have to be an expert in it, right? And so we'll work one-on-one with human resources or an advocate, in your organization, and we'll provide you with the trainings, do surveys, samples, show up at your work site if you like, and actually talk with your employees, and actually do like a cluster analysis. That's that mapping exercise that Connie mentioned. And it's a really cool exercise, and Joe will demonstrate how he does that. And then, we're out to, the encouragement and the capacity building, right? We are out to help you provide those resources. And transportation is constantly mentioned as one of these barriers for getting people to work. And we really are hoping to find a way to help remove that barrier in Vermont through Go Vermont. So from there, I'll turn it over to Joe to talk more about our Vanpool program. But you can find us online at connectingcommuters.org or just type in govermont.org and you'll come right to our website. And my contact information is on the last slide here, but I'll stop sharing and kick it over to Joe.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. And kind of just going to piggyback off what Dan said. I've known Dan I've been with Enterprise almost 25 years now, and with this commute division close to 3.5, 4 years. And Dan had kind of started around that same time to where he went into that position. So Dan and I have been working together and kind of wanted to, use this time to say, hey, what is the barrier? What is stopping businesses from creating a commute culture? Like, we understand that the issues with the recruiting and the retention and the employee engagement, getting people to work on time, all of these, these speed bumps that we talk about are, just something that Commute with Enterprise has been able to kind of overcome or help organizations overcome. And I'll kind of share my screen and just go over some of the statistics and Vanpooling 101 with kind of how it works. But give me one moment here. Where are we? Move this out of the way. There we go. can you see my screen? There we go. So yeah, I mean, I basically wanted to sit here and just kind of go over everything and why is that? There we go. What is Vanpooling? You know, Vanpooling over the years, or an overview of what Commute with Enterprise has been able to do. We bought out a company called V-Ride quite a few years back and have been able to kind of build and that program, and not just helping remove, you know, these vehicles off the road or single occupancy vehicles off the road, but we now operate in 48 different states. Whether it is going back to what Dan was saying, recruiting issue or retention issue, an employee engagement issue, hiring new Americans now. You know, Connie and I had a long discussion over coffee that day, and just kind of just trying to come up with some ideas. So, you know, what I mentioned today may not be specifically what you're looking to overcome with an issue that your organization may be having, but transportation always comes up, you know, during the hiring process and saying, okay, what can I do? You know, how can I help? And what Enterprise has been able to do is create this commute solution. So we are able to kind of connect those coworkers that either live at a central location or travel the same corridor, provide them with a new model vehicle, so it's a reliable form of transportation where they meet up at a central location or make those stops along the way and use this vehicle to get to and from work. And then we are going to provide everything, you know, with that. So what the employees kind of get to use and why they like us so much is they're getting that new vehicle. They are having a full maintenance program included. So everything from tire rotation to oil changes is going to be included with that. Month-to-month convenience. So there's no long-term contracts for them. It's all based on month-to-month. They're going to get 24-hour roadside assistance. They're going to get full collision and comprehensive insurance, plus a $1 million liability policy. So when they do join this program or start a Vanpool, they don't have to come to the table with any of their own personal insurance, and they get to enjoy the savings. So that savings comes from two different ways. One is from the sponsorship and the partnership that we have with Go Vermont, where Go Vermont will be providing 75% of the cost for the first 3 months, and then 50% of the cost for each additional month. So, you know, why, you know, when you come to the table and say, okay, well, you know, what does this cost? What is this for my employees? How can I help? Well, you know, from an employer standpoint, you know, I don't know, like, again, not all of these items are going to be specific to your organization, but how it has helped other employers by reducing the number of spaces that they use in their parking lot. So one vehicle can take up to 15 parking spaces, you know, or alleviate 15 parking spaces. Employee savings from not only Go Vermont, but maybe that employer coming to the table with something. An increase in your carbon footprint, being a good corporate citizen, it's an equitable ride to work. And again, what most people have been helped with in that area is the recruiting and the retention effort. So Dan had mentioned it, I know Connie had mentioned it. What is this mapping analysis and mapping exercise that we do? Well, we do understand that your work site, where your work site is located, there are some employees that live close by that can either walk, bike, ride to work. But there are employees that are also looking for employment that don't live within that 5 to 10 mile radius of where your work site is. So what can we do and how can we help? Well, we want to make sure that we're going to allow these folks, and we know, like, a lot, you know, Connie and I spoke about it earlier, or that time in St. Albans, there are pockets of new Americans now that are located in specific areas. And how do we get them, or how do we, you know, they are great employees, but how do we get them to work? So what we want to do is make sure that we say, all right, some people live close, some people live a little further out, but those ones that live further away, we want to be able to provide them with an equitable ride to work and get them to work. So now you can kind of use this mapping analysis for two reasons. One, you could say, where are my current employees coming from? Because they may be at risk for burnout as well. but where are my employees not coming from? So we run that analysis on your current employees and say to you, with these results, here's how I think you can best help gain employees from outside this area or where they're not coming from, just by utilizing that analysis. And then vehicle cost, it comes down to, what is this going to cost me? We do understand, that providing some type of benefit does make companies, say, okay, if I'm going to go out there and I'm going to look for people for work, it makes you, or as the organization, more attractive to say, hey, I'm going to be including some type of transportation benefit. And then whatever is left over, the riders split the difference. So what I did is I put together just the most expensive vehicle that we carry right now, which is the 15-passenger van. That 15-passenger van comes in at $1,450 per month. Now, for the first 3 months, I put this together. Go Vermont is going to cover 75%. That leaves a balance of $362.50. If, for example, and again, this is only an example, the employer comes to the table and says, hey, I want to pay 50% of what's left over. Well, that's $181 balance. So now if you've got a 15-passenger van, you've got just 6 riders in it. I mean, you look at the difference, or look at what the cost is going to be per person, per month, per day. So when we say, hey, you know what, we want to try to help these employees, we speak to specific organizations first to say, hey, how would you like the program run, or how would you like this? We'll coordinate with you specifically to say how you want this run at your company. Some companies choose to maybe pay for everything up front and then charge your employees on a pre-tax basis afterwards, or on a weekly basis. But we understand everyone is different. So we want, this is just an example, and kind of give you an idea what the cost per employee would be. So it's easy. We want to make it as seamless as possible for both you and the employees. So we would kind of hope and kind of open this up to the room and see, what are some of the burdens that you're hearing? What are some of the issues with transportation that you see that may be unique to, maybe you think it's unique to your organization, but everybody else on this call may be also going through the same burden. So kind of just open the room up to say, raise your hand, or just feel free to jump in and ask Dan, myself, Connie, a question. I know we've been through this with, a couple of the organizations that I see on here today. We have had talks with, or already have vehicles out there. Maybe you could kind of jump in and just let people know how it's been working for you and how it's helped. I see Shannon.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to speak a little bit about Autumn Harp's experience, just a sec, so that I'm actually facing this camera. Okay. So we do have 2 commuter vans functioning right now. The reason that we got those was when we moved from our facility down in Shelburne up to Essex Junction, we obviously wanted to retain our employees. So we set up a deal with Commute with Enterprise. We have 2 vans. They're for 2 separate shifts. And we have folks who are appointed drivers, and I think that they get a discounted rate. I'm not sure on the finances there. And what I've heard from a number of people is that they would not have been able to stay with the company otherwise. I think it's worth it for us to consider expanding. I mean, we have a lot of employees in the Old North End who have transportation difficulties, which is one of those locations where there are a lot of new American employees. But it was absolutely a successful employee retention strategy for us, and overall has had high employee satisfaction.
Thanks, Shannon.
That's great. Thanks, Shannon.
Hey, this is Scott. Just a quick question, either for you, Shannon, or for you, Joe. How are fuel costs typically managed or handled? And it's probably different in different cases, but I'm just curious what might exist today.
Yeah, Sean, that's a great question. So the program is fully customizable to the specific organization. So what most organizations choose to do is we provide a fuel card that comes with that specific van pool. So that van pool will have a WEX card, like a fleet WEX card. that they use throughout the month, and then it is billed out on the following month's invoice. What we do is we kind of figure out what their average route or average fuel expense is going to be. And we estimate that before that group even goes out, just to make sure that they are getting that, that full price or the full out-of-pocket cost once we have gone through, the financing or the subsidy from Vermont, which comes right off the top. The business doesn't even see that, or the riders don't even see that. Whatever the organization is going to come to the table with, and then whatever is left over, those riders will split the difference with that fuel cost included.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
I guess the one other question I had was, typically, is there one person identified who takes the vehicle and stores it at their home, or how I'm more interested in kind of like what happens then being tied in any one thing. What have people seen work?
Yeah, so these groups of employees are formed according to, again, where they live or where they're traveling. So what happens is within that specific group, if let's say there were 10 people in that group, out of those 10 individuals, we would find out who qualifies to drive. We would kind of run a typical MVR license check just to make sure that they qualify, meaning that they're over the age of 25, have a valid driver's license, no more than major driving offenses in the past 5 years. And then if they are qualified to drive, then they either get to take that vehicle home at the end of the day, or some groups decide to meet at a central location, which is easier for them, where they all meet somewhere in the morning, and then whoever one of those qualified drivers will drive that vehicle in the morning. They kind of share the driving responsibilities.
Got it.
But out of that group of 10, if you've got a license and you qualify, we say, hey, fill out the driver form. You could just be a backup driver. God forbid, someone does, that main driver does take off or is away.
Thank you.
Sure.
I will add that there's a small amount of administration associated with it. Our HR team does have a sheet that we give to the drivers to keep track of attendance, and to also keep track of gas expenses, and those are entered into a system monthly. It's that used to be my responsibility back when I worked in HR, and it was, probably less than an hour a week of work. But it is something where you have a little bit of that data.
Thanks, Shannon. Chris, I see your hand.
Yeah, Shannon, I have a question, or actually it can be for Dan as well. And hi, Dan. Good to see you again. And the question is specifically for signing folks up. We seem to experience a lot of issues, and you might have covered it, but I had some folks coming in and out of the office. When getting folks signed up for the program, is Vermont going to be available to come on site and do some assistance with that? Or will that kind of fall to us as a company?
Yeah, Chris, great question. And we kind of leave it up to the business to let us know which way they'd like to go. If they'd like to do some recruitment internally on their own, that's great. Vermont staff is available. We've got a fleet of consultants, that can come on site and help you do an event during a mealtime, or at, your shift break, or whatever the scenario is, or first thing in the morning when everyone's arriving and they're having, their manager's meeting. And so to have that conversation, to let people know, that we're doing a recruitment, around, transportation. And Joe, typically ahead of time, will also ask, the HR folks if they could share some, data on where people live. So we can sort of target, like, is there a group of people that we might already know ahead of time? And then maybe send an email to them, right? Obviously we wanted to nominate it. And so we don't know their names, but internally, if you can ID them and have that conversation before we even arrive, that's really helpful. But absolutely, just showing up on site and just having, some posters out ahead of time, inviting people to attend, and then having the conversation. And so is something we're happy to help with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Chris, and just to kind of add to what Dana said, that mapping analysis is usually the easiest way to kind of kick this program off. So what we'll do is we'll ask an organization to provide employee data without names. So of course we want to protect their their personal information. So we would ask for employee addresses. We would sit down with that organization specifically and say, okay, here's what our findings are. Here's where your current employees are coming from. And then we find clusters of folks that are, that are living somewhere in a specific area. And we say, okay, can you help get these 10 people in a room, because they're all either coming from the same area or traveling the same corridor, and kind of try to form groups from there. And then what you could do from there is, once you do get those van pools or those current employees starting with routes, you can actually send your recruiters out to where those vans are coming from and say, hey, now I could recruit from these specific areas because that's where they're coming from.
Joe, I have a question for you. Maybe you can, if you can speak to, so I think one of the challenges that the resource coordinators see around transportation is when transportation suddenly goes away, or when transportation is more planful, it can be challenging for unexpected things or deviations, or medical appointments or childcare, or these other things that so many employees are doing outside of work, right? So I think there's some question, and I wonder if others are wondering this, like what's it like if you have a van pool, but many of your employees will need to pick up kids or have some of those things that have to happen.
Sure. Well, we'll kind of take this in two directions. One, the first thing is that with that sponsorship from Go Vermont, there is a guaranteed ride home program. So in case that whole van pool does get to work one day and they're, one of the riders has a child that's sick and needs to leave right away, there is that reimbursement for that, whether it be an Uber or Lyft or a cab ride home. I believe, Dan, I think it's 6 times per year per person.
It's set at 4 right now, but
4.
we haven't had a ton of use of the program, so we'd probably allow more.
Right. And then from a standpoint for if you are you have to be 18 to be a rider in the van. Okay, that means meaning that you are going to and from work. Now, if you are a participant in the van pool program and you do have a child that needs to get dropped off at daycare before you travel to the work site, that is allowed as long as you are a participant in that vehicle. So you can utilize that to drop your child or someone off to daycare or whatever it is, and on the way home pick them up. So that is allowed as long as you are a participant in the van pool. So what that is not allowing is like a school to transport 10 children in the van pool. That's not something that we would allow. So if it is just a matter of having to drop them off somewhere, drop them off and then continue on to the work site, that's fine. So that kind of eliminates and helps those that, in the morning saying, hey, you know what, I really can't do this because I have to drop my son or daughter off to daycare. Well, yes, now you can join the van pool program, kind of help to save time, save money, and at the same time, now you're, getting a ride to work.
Yeah.
But
I think that could be a real, that in my mind is one of the reasons employees would maybe not see themselves, like they would self-select out just because they thought, oh, my commitments outside of work might not fit that. Cause you kind of think of a rigid route, but when you talk about deviation from the route, like that can be something that's available based on the employee's need. That's not always, I think that's not what people always think of when they think of van pool, right? You think of more structured route. So that could be a helpful piece of information that employees would need to hear.
And I saw Marlena put a question in the chat. These vehicles are used to go to and from work. That's their main use is what this is for. We also allow additional mileage for anyone who is an approved driver. And some of these groups are utilizing these vehicles. They, a lot of times people don't have a driver's license, or they don't have maybe it's just a single car family and they need to use this. So yes, we do have groups that stop on, once a week. They as a group, they decide what that day is going to be. They do stop, they go shopping, everybody goes inside, does their shopping, they come back out, and then they continue on their route to go home or to their final destination, whether it was, a couple different drop-offs or a couple different stops along the way, or People are dropping off at home, but every group is going to be different. So, and these groups do get tight as a group. The average van pool right now is lasting, 4 to 6 years when you think about it. So once people do start in the program, they do continue just because of the savings and just the reliability of having that new vehicle. So yes, it is all depending on that specific group, whether they want to make that stop at the end of the day, or what day it's going to be. So
I'd be that person that's like, hey, let's stop at Dunkin' Donuts, wanna?
yeah.
The whole group would be like, oh, Connie, not again.
Yeah.
We want to get
Connie,
home.
you'd be surprised because most people or most groups decide that that is their meeting point.
Yeah, no, it makes
So
sense.
they meet at Dunkin' Donuts in the morning, and that's kind of where, and you could work something out with some shopping centers, even like a Walmart or Target, something like that. That's where you're going to meet in the morning. So that could be the meeting spot. And then, okay, you're all going to jump in the vehicle. You're going to make one stop along the way. You're going to pick up 2 more people at a park and ride, and then you're going to continue on to the work site. But what's most important is to find out where the employees are coming from. So to do that mapping analysis and just to say, how can I help? It's not going to work for all. We understand that. But the barriers that we see and the feedback that we get from employers after speaking with them is saying, hey, you know what, this has helped so much. I've been able to recruit from here. I've been able to, add people or take people out of the van as needed. Again, Shannon mentioned it, there is a minimal amount of work that needs to get done, and that's just internal. But the program, we run the program here on our end. We do ask for your support at times, and it depends on, we're going to do all the heavy lifting, but depending on how you want the program run may depend on how much internal work needs to get done. We kind of set everything up. We keep in contact with you. We keep in contact with one person from each vehicle, which is considered our coordinator. So if any messages need to be relayed, we'll call that person when it's time for an oil change, or if there's a recall on that vehicle. We want to make sure that we reach out to that person who's in charge of that vehicle to make sure that work does get done. Everything for maintenance is billed directly to Enterprise, so no one has to put any money out of pocket for any of that. And again, this is month to month. We are not asking, when you do partner with Enterprise, there are 2 agreements when you look at it from an agreement or a contract standpoint. The first agreement is between Enterprise and that organization. And what that contract basically says, or agreement, I should say, it basically outlines how you want the program to be run, whether it's offering pre-tax benefits, a paid van pool parking spot once you get to the facility, how you want to build, whether you're going to build a company, whether we're going to build the employee. So it basically outlines that program. And then that second contract is between Enterprise and that van pool. So if any of you have ever rented a car, that's the contract between Enterprise and those people that are driving the vehicle. So we want to make sure that all the liability and the workers' comp claims are kept out of, away from the organization.
Joe, can you say more about that? That was one of my questions. I'm working over at UVM and Custodial, and we share some of these transportation problems. So I appreciate your work. Is this all being driven by insurance? Your insurance company is doing all of the liability and shielding the employer? Because I can just see a lot of people in my company putting up a stop sign.
Yeah, absolutely, Caleb. Thanks for chiming in there. Yeah, so we cover the vehicle itself, bumper to bumper with 0 deductible, first of all. So we cover the collision and the comp on the vehicle itself. We also add a $1 million liability policy per incident. So if there was an accident, we cover up to the first $1 million. Now, on top of that, and I'm going to knock on some wood here, we really haven't seen a claim go over $1 million, because we find that when people are in this van pool, they drive safer, slower, because they do have other people in the car that they're that are in that vehicle. So from a standpoint, yes, if it is a to and from the work site, there should be no liability to the company. So this is basically like people getting in a carpool or jumping on a bus in the morning to get to and from work. Caleb, I am not an attorney, so I cannot say that, in regards to if there was an accident, what an attorney is going to kind of try to bring to the table. But from my experience, I can tell you that, the claims that we do have or we have had have been covered up to that $1 million.
Thanks.
And as long as you're not providing a paid driver, and this is a volunteer, so people are joining us voluntarily, and you are not paying someone to drive that vehicle specifically. So you could have an employee, for instance, that works for your company. You're kind of not charging them because they're driving the vehicle. That's okay, but their main purpose is not they were not hired just to drive that vehicle. Yeah, there should be no gray area with that.
Joe, just going back to the cost structure, I put it in the chat, but it's just to go back to that pie, right? So subsidy, rider, and employer, if in that amount that $30, I think that you're calculated on the screen, could that be offset by the employer increasing their contribution?
Yeah.
So like that number can move based on employer contribution.
Correct. Yeah. And that was, again, that was just an example after the subsidy from Vermont. If the employer said, I will come to the table at 50% of the cost left over. So for an organization that is trying to increase their recruiting and retention, we have found what works best in the past year or two since COVID had hit, and they're looking to kind of get employees in the door and keep them once they get them, is to where that organization will cover the cost fully after the sponsorship from Go Vermont. Then what they do is internally, what we help that organization do is figure out what that cost is per week or per month. And then what they can do is on a pre-tax basis, charge that employee right out of their pay on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis. And what we do is help them figure out what that cost is going to be to kind of recoup most of what they had put out of pocket. So a lot of times now, it could be as low as $20 per week. So when you tell an employee, hey, you come here as a benefit, we're going to get you a ride to work. And this is, out of pocket pre-tax, it's going to cost you $20 per week. And that includes your transportation and fuel. So when it comes down to it, the more you fill the van, of course, the cheaper per person it is. But we'll work that out. Again, every organization is going to be different with that sponsorship. So I could just tell you what works best, and from my experience, what has worked over the past. And it is that the company sponsors it and then charges internally, but does not have to.
Gotcha. Yeah. This is really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, my question to you is like, what do you think has like kind of been the roadblock or had stopped you from kind of instituting some type of transportation benefit to your employees? That's kind of my question to you, to see kind of what is there something that Connie and I and Dan have had this discussion. I can't tell you how many times, and we're trying to figure that out on our own, saying, hey, what is that roadblock? What is that hurdle that we could get over to say, hey, let's have the discussion. It doesn't hurt to just say, let's sit down, specifically with your organization, have the discussion and say, will this work for you? And then kind of go forward with that mapping analysis to just see where we could help best. But I think that's kind of where we're hitting a roadblock right now, is to say, hey, what is, stopping you from doing that?
I see Eric's hand. Go ahead, Eric. You have a question?
Yeah, so I think the negative stigma associated with Vanpooling, rural Vermont, particularly in the northwest part of the state, prevents them the freedom to be able to do the things that they wanted to do either before work or after work. Shift workers, and again, you want to break free and pick up your kid if they're sick, or timing your rides with the rest of your shift workers are all elements. And then just that feel good part of it when you do finally make enough money and you can afford a vehicle.
Mhm.
There's certain elements to that show that you've made it. So everyone, at least in Franklin County, appears they need a pickup truck. So there's all of those elements that go into it, and still, at least my exposure to this part of the state, they're going to continue to feel not as good about themselves as
yeah, you do. You bring up a great point, Eric. This is not for everyone. And we know that's not for everyone. We don't expect the entire organization or every single employee to join this. But when you look at what's going on right now and gas prices, like Dan had mentioned earlier, the cost of being included in this program is less than what it would cost you to put gas in your car for a week. And we do understand that some people do like to take their own cars. Their jobs may not, allow them to be part of this program. And again, this is not for everybody. It's usually around that 20% of those employees either need the help or are looking for help. And if we could help some of the employees and those that need it, and kind of help your recruiting department kind of with the outreach of saying, hey, once those van pools are out there, we could kind of start hiring from those areas that they're coming from and just have it offered as another solution. It's out there. So absolutely, you bring up a great point. It's not for everyone. So
it's great options.
Yeah.
And speaking to new American communities in particular, I have interest. But I'm guessing there's a high probability that nobody in those communities will have a driver's license. Mm-hmm. So now, what are your options?
Again, we want to make sure that when we first start this, we want to kind of map out where your current employees are coming from. You may have, we're finding that some of those those employees that live further out are those current employees. And for a program like this, let's say would cost $30 per week per person, you could say to that current employee, hey, you know what? I know you live 40 miles out, you're spending X amount of dollars per month to come into work. Would you mind driving this vehicle? We're not going to charge you that $30, $40 a month, but all we ask is that you pick up these folks on the way in. And then on the second half of that, now that person or that driver of this vehicle now can call their insurance company and say, hey, I only use my vehicle for recreational use, lower their insurance premium. Now they have a second car on the weekend that they could use, whether it's an SUV or a van that they could use for personal use because they are the driver of that vehicle. So there are benefits to someone becoming a driver and picking up people on the way in. So it kind of benefits both the organization and that person that raised their hand and said, hey, yeah, you know what, I'll be a driver.
Yeah, I guess that's that initial hump though, right? You're gonna have something that can drive.
Yeah, it's getting it's finding that person that is willing to be a driver and sitting down with them and saying, here are some of the benefits.
Yeah, but then they also need to be a good employer for you, not just a driver. So
correct.
Chris, did you have your hand up too?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on kind of the barrier thing, and one of the barriers that we had foreseen is kind of that administrative side of the individuals. Finding the driver is a little bit of a barrier, but certainly, the advantage of taking the vehicle home and having that use, which I don't know that they had always through this program historically, because my familiarity with the program goes back pretty much all the way to when Go Vermont began. And then the other thing that you guys have seemingly done is eliminated that need to sign up kind of through the app and then administratively pay for the services. And I can see Dan shaking his head, which was a huge barrier previously. And so that is definitely a good advantage, and having the employer option certainly has helped. And so it's going to be kind of that, those kind of couple things are what I still see as are kind of bigger barriers. It's finding that driver, but again, we have an incentive now, so definitely I think something that can be helpful. A little bit more freedom, I think, in the ride ability and the mapping to go do those groceries and daycare things. Again, improvements over, I think, former versions of the program. And then that final one, which is just administratively figuring it out. And ultimately, if we can make that a fixed cost for a company, I don't know that we're going to worry about charging. I mean, fixed costs for a company is very easy for us to predict and budget. It's the variable cost that we honestly don't care for as much.
Right. And yeah, you do bring up a couple of great points. Yeah, it has evolved over the last couple of years and since, I even started with the division. And I could tell you that moving forward, it's going to be changing again and evolving again to almost like a where you have an app, and I kind of want to bring it up. It's not coming for another couple of months or almost a year, but you're going to be able to just like schedule your ride to say, hey, I work Tuesdays and Thursdays. Here's my route. You put your name in there, and then it just puts you into that vehicle. You pay towards that, and it kind of comes off the top of that group that's already riding. So you could have like a 7-passenger vehicle with like 15 people in on that route because of just the way the schedules work. So it's all going to be kind of funneled into that specific route, and it's kind of evolving now, Chris. So it's just forever changing. So they're just they're working on it. They're piloting it now. So it's more of like, yeah, again, you said it, Connie, it's an on-demand van pool service that's going to be coming.
I did a lot of that transportation study years ago as a former employee of Bridge, a former employee of Green Mountain Transit, a former planner of Green Mountain Transit.
Yeah.
I'm very familiar with all of that and kind of help develop some of those plans. It is the app piece that I'm finding with my demographic of employees, which we're in 2022. So hearing myself say it's the app challenge is a little bit surprising, but reality is that piece is the challenge. We have an app here that they can use, and they won't. A lot of my employees, that technology is the barrier. And it just continues to be for whatever reason. Even some of my employees that you would not anticipate would be a tech challenge. I don't know if it's just refusal, but will not embrace technology. And that's where I see kind of one of my biggest barriers is getting people to sign up for the app, getting them to comply, which is why I said fixed cost, and we worry about the cost as the employer is an easy model that I can work with. It's the individuals having to sign up, individuals having to have an account, and individuals having to have a method to pay. That's where I will lose a lot of the ability to effectively implement the program.
Yeah, as resource coordinators, I think can attest to a lot of the time when we're working with employees, it's to help employees connect virtually with, digital literacy or with technology skills where, maybe filling out online forms is not something that an employee is prepared to do or knows how to do or does regularly. They're in jobs where they're working with their hands or they're with people. Those are different skill sets than maybe interfacing with a lot of technology. And so we're in that place of it does take relationship and support and pathways. How do you help people get to the resource in this as simplest form as possible? So maybe thinking about ways we could take that burden out or create more access. And Chris, thank you for your work in the past, because I think GMT has completed the Barrie pilot project and then looking to the Northwest to do an on-demand pilot project that will complement the public transit, the bus route that continues to that's not going to change. It's pretty fixed. But these on-demand options could also be other solutions that will come forward. So yeah, there's a lot happening in transportation, and it's always important for us to revisit these things because they change. It's one of the reasons we like to come together as a network, and I think learn and see what can we do. So oh my gosh, we're out of time. And
in the chat, I posted Joe and I's contact information in case it's helpful for anyone. So it's there. If you have questions for Joe on, setting up a meeting, or for me with the general Go Vermont stuff, happy to have that conversation. Also happy to tackle public transit as well. And so, those microtransit pilots that Connie was alluding to, those are being tested across the state. And Barrie is the next portion of the state to be selected, along with Middlebury, Springfield, and Morrisville. So if you have, if you're in any of those communities, look for information about that and seeing about utilizing those on-demand trips for some of your employees.
Yeah, and folks, if your resource coordinators are going to make sure you know about any on-demand van options that come to your area. So we're very hopeful that becomes more and more available. But so we'll keep a watch. Thanks, Tammy, for that. I see that, and we'll be watching and informing you, keeping you updated. Thank you, Dan and Joe. Appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks to all the great questions. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.